Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar featuring our self-funded research on brand trust in turmoil. Before we get started, I want to cover just a few housekeeping items. I'd love for you to just say hello in the chat, give your name, tell us where you are, and if there's anything in particular you're interested in hearing about today, feel free to note that as well. Please submit any questions in the Zoom Q&A feature. So we don't miss anything. We'll address those questions at the end of the session. And then at the end, we'll also ask for your feedback. So if you could respond to that anonymously, we'd really appreciate that feedback. So just to get started, I'd like to give some intros. My name is Amy Modini. I oversee our healthcare and insurance practice here at CMB. I'm joined by a few colleagues, Brant Cruz, who's our SVP of Platforms and Audiences, Sasha McCune, who's our VP of Media, Entertainment, and Culture, and Julia Walker, who's our AVP of Account Management. I'd like to just level set, and share just a bit about CMB for those of you who may not be familiar with us. So we are a leading insights and consultancy based here in Boston. We serve some of the world's leading brands across a handful of industries, including tech and telecom, media and entertainment, financial services, healthcare, retail, and travel and hospitality. And we work in close partnership with our clients to grow and differentiate their brands, help them design customer experiences, build products, and also ignite audience connections. We offer solutions across quantitative, qualitative, and advanced analytics, and we have a deep understanding of leveraging AI solutions and technology. So how did we start this journey to understand brand trust? So we know that brands measure trust often within a brand health tracker and identify trust as a key driver of consideration and loyalty. But we really wanted to understand at a deeper level, what does trust mean to consumers and what levers can brands use to influence and move the needle on trust? So what you'll hear today, some highlights across a number of different areas. So trust has declined overall within the categories we measured from the end of the year until now. We see that trust is more than just a single measure, right? It's multidimensional. It has 6 factors, which we'll talk about over the course of this session. And trust really does impact the bottom line. The most trusted brands were those that were most likely to be considered, have higher satisfaction, and more loyal customers. And those with lower brand trust really suffered across some of those key metrics. And finally, while the drivers are fairly consistent, which levers to push and what really matters does differ by industry and category, and even by brand. So by identifying the attributes that build trust, we can help our clients really understand where to invest to influence that consumer behavior. So even though there are external factors that can play a role in impacting brand trust, our framework will help provide that roadmap to improve brand trust across brands and across categories.
So we started on this trust journey about 6 months ago when CMB developed a proprietary model to better understand how consumers think about brand trust and what it really takes to move that needle. So we focused our prior study in December 2024 on several key industries and brands, namely financial services, tech and telecom, and media and entertainment. And since then, we've expanded that work and rerun the study within new brands and these new industries that are highlighted here. Now, in this research, we talked to about 1,500 consumers in May 2025, leveraging a 15-minute quant survey, and we added an AI smart probe open-end as well to get some richer qualitative feedback on trust as well. Now, today in this webinar, we'll cover some of those key outcomes of this research. You'll hear from Amy about our dynamic simulator, which allows us to model the impact of shifting certain trust dimensions. Brant will cover the competitive comparisons and some subgroup analysis within the airline industry. And then Sasha will dig into our proprietary AI agent that combines our brand trust results along with external data to help us interpret, visualize, and action on these insights. But first, I'll provide a little bit of context. Now, while we were fielding this latest study, and really over the last 6 months, there were several macroeconomic, cultural, and political shifts that brands were navigating. And on the screen here, you can see just a few examples of some logos that made headlines. For instance, United Healthcare managing a high-profile leadership transition, and Delta responding to softening travel demands, and Target facing consumer boycotts. At the same time, our data was showing that there's growing consumer concern around market conditions, such as, tariffs and stock market fluctuations. And as a result, consumers have begun to shift their spend. So this was really an early indication that how brands navigate external challenges may directly impact trust. But in order to test that hypothesis, we asked consumers in the three industries that we previously surveyed, so tech, media, and financial services, how much they trust those same brands today. And in all three cases, as you can see here, trust levels dropped significantly. So, we wondered what is driving this relationship? And part of that answer might lie in the broader narrative over the last few years about companies profiting off of inflation and the public debate over, brands passing tariff-related costs to consumers. But what's clear is that external forces are influencing brand perceptions, and trust is not immune to that. But to help us further connect the dots between trust and market volatility, we wanted to ask consumers if they feel they can trust brands to act responsibly in this environment specifically. Now, before we reveal the results to that question, we wanted to see what you all think. So you should find a poll on your screen. The question is, which industry do you think was least trusted to act responsibly during these market conditions? That's on average here, we did ask consumers this question on an individual brand basis, but average those results by category to come up with an answer here. So I'll give everybody a moment to respond to this poll. And Monica, I think we can reveal the results whenever you're ready. Okay, interesting. So a lot of votes for healthcare, but some split responses, some insurance, retail. Well, to reveal the results here, those who said insurance, you would be correct. So as the data shows, trust is really low across the board here when it comes to brands acting in consumers' best interest in these volatile conditions. But for insurance, trust is particularly fragile as not a single brand here met our threshold of being very likely to be trusted. So really, while skepticism is broad, what I find interesting is that some individual brands still manage to rise above their category. And I think this is really good news for brands as it suggests that a brand's actions can break through those category-wide skepticism. So before we dive into the specific trust dimensions that we uncovered and the insights for these newer industries, we wanted to include some details about the analysis that led us to this framework. So we began with consumers evaluating a comprehensive set of dimensions on trust. These were just various components that we hypothesized might make up trust. And with this list, we ran a factor analysis and uncovered some key dimensions that represented unique trust factors that our clients might be able to act on. Then we called back this list and tested to ensure that our reduced set of dimensions were just as good at modeling trust. And ultimately, we developed our trust score, which includes 6 key factors with a weighted combination of attributes in each that's based on a driver model of overall trust. So without further ado, we'll reveal our 6 trust dimensions. Last time, we identified these 6 pillars of trust and their relative importance in driving trust. We've since retested these dimensions across the new industries and even introduced some additional attributes just to see if any updates were needed to these dimensions. But we found that the original 6 held strong, and this consistency gave us a lot of confidence that we identified the right framework and one that works across categories. The bonus here is that by holding these pillars steady, we're able to benchmark trust performance both within and across categories. So we can help brands understand what a good score really looks like. So with that, let's look at some brand trust scores across industries. So here you can see that trust performance varies widely by industry. Health systems sit at the top here, which includes brands like Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, which benefit from long-standing reputations and a strong sense of purpose as well. On the other end of the spectrum, airlines face real trust headwinds. So despite the fact that, air travel is essential to modern life, inconsistent policies and poor service experiences have eroded that consumer confidence in that category as a whole. So let's take a look at how these trust dimensions play out in the different categories, because I think it's really important to recognize that the weight of the dimensions as well as the meaning can vary a lot depending on the context and the industry. So I'll just focus on a couple of dimensions here. First, double clicking into responsiveness. So while responsiveness scores are relatively low across the industry, it's a critical driver for hotels and insurance. In these sectors, it's not just nice to have, it's really essential. Think about when a guest has a problem with a room or a policyholder is dealing with a claim. How quickly and helpfully a brand responds can make or break that experience. Next, let's take a deeper look at integrity. So for health systems and retail, integrity rises to the top as the most important trust driver. And in healthcare specifically, I think this makes a lot of sense, right? Patients are literally putting their lives in the hands of providers. And, they need to trust that care decisions are being made ethically. Whereas in retail, expectations around integrity are high because consumers want to feel that, pricing is fair, return policies are honored, and that the brand is really standing behind what they sell. Finally, let's take a deeper look at transparency. So this dimension is particularly critical in insurance and leisure. In insurance, of course, we know consumers want to know exactly what's covered, what's not, what they'll owe, and they don't want to be surprised by hidden fees or fine print in moments that matter when they're making claims. Similarly, within leisure, families planning vacations want to understand pricing, inclusions, and what to expect, especially as we think about a post-COVID world. There's just a heightened sensitivity around safety protocols and cancellation policies and potential disruptions. So when brands in this space are open and upfront, it helps build confidence and encourages repeat business. Now, in general, in this survey, we tested about 70 brands across industries, and the results here show a clear spectrum of trust performance. At the top, we see, USAA, Costco, Mayo Clinic, all of which benefit from strong reputations and consistent delivery that's earned lasting consumer advocacy. Now, on the flip side, brands like Spirit, United Healthcare, and Target landed in that bottom tier. And, I think this really tracks with some of the aforementioned headlines about public missteps and backlash from consumers. But overall, in many ways, these rankings feel very intuitive to us. They reflect not just how people feel, but how brands have acted in these critical moments. So the result really makes clear to us that external events and how brands respond are shaping trust. So with that, I'll pass it to Amy to bring this framework to life with a healthcare case example.
Thank you, Julia. I'd like to walk you through a specific example with Kaiser Permanente, which is one of the brands that we tested in our self-funded study. Um, and in this case, keep in mind that Kaiser Permanente kind of sits between this idea of a health system because they deliver care and a health insurance company as well, right? So they're an integrated health system. So their brand health score, or excuse me, brand trust score, is below the overall average for the healthcare industry. So they're sitting at 55 relative to that 64. And part of their core value is really being patient-centered, right? And so that's what consumers need to feel as they're experiencing them or thinking about brand engagement. What we see is dependable, customer focused, and having integrity were some of the large drivers for Kaiser. And so, as we think about how that played out, what are the ways in which consumers were communicating to us that Kaiser was a high trust brand or a low trust brand, for example? So, a few quotes here. They're a well-known, respected company, right? But they won't refer out of network, for example, even when they don't have the expertise. So these are some of the things that we heard from consumers directly as they responded. So we all love good verbatims, right? A qualitative insight, rich insight is really powerful. But we really needed to go beyond that and quantify this data, right? And what this meant and help brands be able to make decisions. And so with that, we created a proprietary simulator tool. And so you see here an example. This is a static example of that tool, but really it's a dynamic tool. So as you make changes, you would see the overall impact, for example, to specific attributes and that overall brand trust score. And so this is a tool, right, that researchers and stakeholders can use to model and really support decision making in real time, right? And so in this example, we see that focusing on customer first. So putting the needs of customers first over profit, going above and beyond to make the customer feel valued, and then a couple of dependability and integrity items are really what would have the most impact on brand trust. So as those are communicated and perceptions may shift, that brand trust score could ultimately move from 55, where it currently sits, to 58. So again, the simulator is about taking action. So thinking about the metrics that matter for your brand, considering perhaps what competitors are doing, but really being able to move the needle and leverage this type of simulator tool in conversations with stakeholders, for example. So with that, I'll turn it over to the healthcare expert, Brant.
Healthcare expert.
Excuse me,
That,
airline
that,
expert.
that may be the first time I've ever been accused of being anything related to healthcare. I appreciate that. I have lost a couple pounds. Uh, Thank you, Amy, the uh, for that great example. And I've never met a simulator from our analytics team that I didn't love. So that was great to follow that lead. So I wanted to start at the beginning of the journey rather than thinking about what a specific brand would do. We went a little bit wider. So I got fewer sample size from each individual airline to do a deep dive on any one. And as someone who has spent way more time on and waiting for planes, I wanted to dig a little bit more into what may be an outlier here among industries with airline having one of the lowest scores. So the when I look at the full range of scores across industries, for the new industries it was 59 to 70, airlines was at 57. And I wanted to dig in to understand how the pillars may be different between airlines and others. So across all the industries that we measured, old and new wave, dependability when you include financial services and tech and telecom and media and entertainment from the first wave, dependability gets even higher than it was before. Still the highest for airlines, but what stuck out to me was looking at that customer first and responsiveness as being super high important relative to others, and kind of wondered why that was, why those two drivers would have a bigger impact than they do on the average industry um, for airlines. And I think some of it has to do with customers expect airlines to have more control over the kind of things that go into customer first and responsiveness than the attributes that make up dependability. In other words, trust gets more of a bump when they succeed and are more penalized for failure when they do or don't do things like go above and beyond for customers or quickly resolve issues relative to other industries. So now you see it. I'm going to take a small pause here as you've all been waiting for. This is the obligatory performance versus important 2x2 you've all been waiting for. You can all breathe a collective sigh of relief and pause. You've seen it. So, harkening back to the last slide, I mentioned that dependability is relatively lower for airlines than it is across lots of other industries, but it's still number one. So the performance on dependability. So as we look at the y-axis, dependability, um, and most of the other factors are very similar in terms of performance across that horizontal. But what stuck out to me was that when I looked at data digging into these, that dependability trailed other industries on performance by 5 percentage points. So um, most of these are pretty similar to other industries, but dependability showed the biggest gap to all of the average of all other industries. Now, you could argue that airlines have a higher bar there because other industries don't face weather problems and regulatory problems and air traffic control. But still, I think as you look at the verbatims on the right-hand side, customers know it when they see it in terms of what makes an airline dependable versus not. So people have a reference point for what makes up dependability versus what does not. So next, I wanted to understand as I mentioned, not enough sample to dig into any single airline individually. I wanted to understand how performance may differ by cohorts of airlines. So we developed three different cohorts of airlines. On the left-hand side, specialty/regional airlines, Hawaiian and Alaska. In the center, legacy airlines, Delta and United and American. And on the right-hand side, Southwest and Spirit. And you can see that the overall trust scores, which are in the bubbles 71, 61, and 46 respectively, differ pretty dramatically based on the cohort of the airline. And I think that they differ relatively similar to what my expectations would be and others that I've seen. As we dig into the data that goes underneath that, the pillar performance, you see pretty dramatic gaps from the average between the specialty regional airlines doing much better than average, the legacy airlines doing a bit better than average, and the budget airlines doing much worse than average. These are weighted averages, so don't try to do the math exactly across for each of the three different cohorts of airlines. So I think that the something about the regional airlines and what they're doing is clearly better. The biggest gaps there are on the transparency and customer first. And I think that the both Hawaiian and Alaska are pretty well known for how friendly their staff is, what they try to do to make each experience memorable, which is kind of what travel should be, and how well they get ahead of delays and those types of things. So finally, I drilled more into, wanted to take a look at different generational cohorts and understand if or what may have been different across them. So blessedly, I'm not going to bombard you with any more numbers, but looking at just some summing up differences by generational cohorts and how we may wind up making different recommendations based on the generation, this across airline industries. When we looked at Gen Z, for example, some of the things that stuck out looking at the driver analysis and looking at the verbatim comments was they care about airlines avoiding manipulative or misleading practices. And because of that, we may recommend that an airline focus on dispelling fears of hidden fees or greenwashing. And for boomers, and no, I'm not quite old enough to be a boomer, but despite looking so, we focus on loyalty to a dependable brand, and therefore we might recommend that we emphasize on-time performance and a valuable loyalty program. So what does kind of all of this mean, I think, as I think about what I would do if I was sitting in the seat of someone making decisions around if or how to measure trust. I think it reinforced for me that understanding your trust score among target audience is a critical first step in prioritizing resources to build trust. Testing your brand among your top competitors and benchmarking against the overall category trust score is a good thing to do. Identifying the relative importance of the 6 pillars of trust for your category and identifying the gaps for your brand would be an important part of the steps. I'd want to target the drivers within the pillar you want to improve operationally and or with targeted messaging and figure out how far you think you can increase your performance there and then measure/track improvement over time for consideration and loyalty as you can build trust for your brand. So all of my stuff was pulled from my old school digging in and with the simulator, banner tables, and manipulating Excel. Next up, my much smarter and younger colleague Sasha is going to wow you with how much more efficient she's been using the custom GPT we built from the self-funded foundation.
Thanks, Brant. I'll share a little bit more about going rogue with our exciting AI experiments soon. But first, I'll dive a little bit more into the retail category at a high level. We're also seeing that trust is no longer easily given in this volatile landscape with retail brands, similar to some of the things that Brant found in the airline industry with budget airlines. Brands that are known for affordability and accessibility, like Target and Walmart, actually ended up on the bottom of our trust rankings. And that was kind of the opposite of what I expected, personally, in a moment of high inflation when consumers are feeling really sensitive about price and spending. So I wanted to dig a little bit more into that. And, at the foundation, at the high level, when we ask consumers in retail about trust and brands they trust organically, the thing that comes most top of mind to them is value alignment. We hear it a lot. And we had an example here about Patagonia, a brand that came up to reflect their own value beyond just their wallet. So seeing that at the high level, people go right away to relevance as a part of their connectivity, connecting to the brand's values. Yet at the same time, relevance scores for retail were among the lowest that we saw across all brands measured. So that made me wonder if post-pandemic, when retail is already in a bit of a challenged position, is the heart of some of the trust challenges that brands like Target and Walmart are navigating, are those actually cultural issues? Are those actually cultural challenges that we need to address? And Target is having their own challenges. As you heard, Julia mentioned before recent public brand boycotts coming in the news. Open ends also showed that a key driver of what people were mentioning in their open ends for Target and Walmart were issues around DEI programs changing, messages that brands put out, things related to the boycott itself. So it's definitely popping as a key thing to look into more. So I went ahead and dug into the data, as Brant alluded, with an opportunity to play with a fun new sandbox tool that our team built. So as this is a self-funded study, it's a great opportunity to experiment and explore. So Amy showed you the cool simulator our teams make. Those are a really great way to dig into the levers to pull and figure out how you can move the needle on your metric. But I had actually wanted to see a different cut in the data. So I asked my team for a cut of that data, a new crosstab, and they came back and said, actually, we just created this really cool new experimental custom GPT trained off of our data. Do you want to play with it? Which was, of course, I right away said, yes, please. So as I dug into this new innovation that the team built, it is really a masterpiece. It's very exciting and very new to the team. Richard on our product development innovation team built this with Seth and RM and Lisa. And I'll share a little bit more about how it was created to kind of take away the black box before I kind of show you a little bit how I used it. So what the team built was a walled advanced GPT. They trained it on the very best of our own CMB training and research skills. So as they built the custom GPT, they trained it to be a researcher, to prioritize foundational research skills, to leverage data analysis and synthesis skills, and also to remind it that we like data visualization, right? So that was a key part of things that they put into it as they built it. And they also trained it to be explicit and only reference and cite data that it had itself. So trying to take away the hallucination problems from the picture and kind of keep it self-referential was the team's goal. Next, they began structuring that data and getting it ready for ingestion, making sure that it had all the pieces from our study in there, open ends, brand trust rankings, and all the data points that we might need to be looking for. And then comes the fun part where I got to interact with it and collaborate with it through prompting and summarization. So naturally, I went a little wild. I asked for no coaching going into this tool. I just dove in and played with it. So in the background here, you're going to see some samples and some screenshots of the prompting and results and analysis work that I was doing that will kind of rotate through. I started off, to be honest, with the simplest prompt that you can have. I dove right in and I just threw what I wanted to investigate into it, and I just wrote target in all caps and hit enter. What surprised me the most was that our data source was so rich due to the way that our team built and trained the agent that one word could actually generate a lot of data back to me that was much more effective than diving into the crosstabs. For me, I could kind of play with it, see what it gave me. It really also unlocked mixed methods for me right away. We had open ends in the survey as well as structured data. And what it delivered back to me when I was prompting was a combination of both our structured data and our numbers, as well as some of the verbatim themes and direct quotes from the open ends that I would have been looking for next anyways. So it was really great to see that all together in one place and work through it and work with it. And as I played with it, I asked it to make comparisons to specific brands, to add Costco or others, the highest performing and the lowest performing, so that I could see the gap and the divide between what made for a really high score and what made for a lower score. And then I could even ask it to mirror its analysis done on one brand for another so that I could kind of dig a little bit deeper. And for me, as I was doing these side-by-sides and the analysis, I was able to get to business actionability and strategy a little bit faster as I looked at the data and figured out how to interpret it. But next, I wanted to see what it could do for me if I wanted a bigger picture on what's going on in the world. because a lot of the things I was finding in the data about the relevance issues were pointing to things that were also happening in the news. So I wanted to see what the broader cultural conversation was around the themes that I was seeing. I was seeing issues around reversal of DEI policies, quality for price, especially in inflation time. I was seeing signals of in-store experience satisfaction issues, customer service issues, employee experience issues. So all of these things I wanted to see, how are people talking about this in the broader landscape? So I actually then asked ChatGPT to help me go into some of those additional layers in the social conversation, find examples in the media and in the news and social media that were happening. And we saw that these deficits of trust were definitely playing out on a public stage. So thinking about finding the proof points for stakeholders, we were able to also see YouGov and Placer AI data reporting that at the same time we fielded the study, we saw also drops in popularity, drops in foot traffic. So we're seeing these trust issues not just play out in the score, but also in the bottom line of the business. And so that, if you think about bringing those pieces together for stakeholders, is a compelling story to start to think, how do we fix this and what do we do about it? So as I was playing with all these pieces, really it helped me get to the so what quicker as a tool. This is a perfect example of AI and HI coming together to help us accomplish speed to action and taking this data that we'd already invested in custom research and figuring out what a path forward might be from that data once we've identified the problems and solutions. So for an example, I iterated with this to come up with what's the roadmap, what's the plan. And I will say we still need humans. The first few drafts were pretty terrible, but bringing our business experience into it and working with the content, we're able to come up with something that feels like an action plan that we can take next. So whether it's fixing service design issues and fixing customer experience problems, or identifying new strategies to speak to those cultural disconnects, or finding new ways for brands to navigate inflation and value calculation in this moment in time. There were a lot of different pathways for taking action. So 3 cheers to the team that built this. It's pretty exciting and cool. We're going to continue to develop and experiment with this in our own work as well.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. So where do we go from here? What does it mean for your business? So there are a number of ways to integrate brand trust into overall business strategies. One way is to think about transitioning brand trust measurement into an existing brand health program, for example. So you could add in some metrics, allowing you to both maintain a trend line, but establish some new benchmarks, for example. And then perhaps over time, some of those KPIs your organization may be using and leveraging for decision making could shift, and perhaps brand trust becomes a guiding light, for instance. You could also kind of shift and create your own proprietary trust system, right? Leveraging some of our framework, but modifying it for your brand, your category or industry, or even the competitive environment. The second way is really to think about developing a multi-lens approach, right? So Sasha talked a bit about this, bringing in, right, social media, social scraping, other industry news, that competitive lens. But also thinking internally from a business perspective, like what are the elements that you need to consider as you might be monitoring, changing and shifting elements that could impact brand trust, right? So that brings me to that final way here of integrating brand trust into the whole organization, right? So it shouldn't just sit in a bubble. We really believe it's important to consider brand trust and the impact across various functional areas. So everyone in an organization has a role in both building and cultivating brand trust. And so as brand trust changes, others in the organization need to know what to do about it, right? So there may be some key questions you can begin to to ask yourselves to see the impact that trust can have on the organization. And so integrating trust into those decisions across functional areas can really have a greater impact on loyalty overall. So with that, I will just mention that the QR code here is my email address. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, you want to learn more about learning workshops. I think there was a question about getting access to the report. So the recording and a full report will be sent via email over the next couple of days. We're going to just do a quick poll. This will all be anonymous. We're not sharing these results. We'd love this feedback. And then while you're answering that, I'm going to start looking at the Q&A and we'll answer the questions that we've gotten over the course of the session. So the first question I see here, when would it make sense to add brand trust into an existing tracker versus doing it as a separate study? So I will take that question. It really kind of depends on your existing brand tracking program, right? And that might vary by industry, for example. Is it a continuous tracking program with ongoing fielding? Is it a quarterly program? Is it an annual program, for example, right? So if it's continuous, for instance, you could perhaps add a strategic module, a rotating module in a given quarter to get some of that brand trust insight and then, integrate from there depending on what you learn. If you have, for instance, an annual study, you may want to just have a separate brand trust study and then integrate them kind of over time, depending on what you see. Can brand trust be applied to other types of customers like B2B?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and one we've gotten a few times here. I think obviously this was built on consumer data. However, I think that a lot of these constructs are very human-centered, so I think this can apply to other audiences. If we were to test it in a B2B audience, I would recommend changing some of the wording of the attributes to be more B2B versus B2C facing. And then also testing out some new attributes as well, things that we hypothesize might be important in that context. But I think that's certainly something that we can try, and I think a lot of the existing dimensions really apply across different audiences.
Great. How did you draw sentiments, positive, negative, and neutral out of open ends? And also key themes, which words or topics stand out? Was it all done using the AI tool, manually, or a mix?
Yeah, I mean, so like a lot of what we do at CMB, we really take this approach of AI plus HI. So we leveraged a couple of different AI tools to see the different themes that came out, but we did have our team also review all of the open ends and run through as well, and including looking for not only just positive and negative, but also what themes were we seeing by category, and adding that HI or human intervention level as well.
Great, thank you. I have a question on airlines. Interesting to see airlines near the bottom. They seem to be charging separate fees for everything. How and where does that factor into trust?
I'll take that one. And I had actually seen the that question in the chat in the Q&A when it popped up. I'll say that it drives my wife crazy, and I've likely carried more 150-pound check luggage that's been stuffed so full that so that we never have to check a bag, probably more than anyone else on this call. It's a really great question. I think that the extra fees fall directly in a couple of the pillars. First, the transparency pillar, which includes open and honest, clear and transparent information, avoids manipulative or misleading practices. And then the rest probably in the customer first pillar, where one of the items is customer first over its profits. So I think that that's where it is, and that's where airlines are getting hit. Um, I think relative to when I think about the airlines that are doing well generally, Hawaiian, I know, often bundles services like meals and bags on its longer routes. They probably don't on the inter-island flights, uh, which supports kind of the idea of openness and no hidden costs. And I've been JetBlue Mosaic myself for many years, and love the idea of how I think even regular passengers without any status get kind of limitless snacks uh, by walking to kind of where they put the snacks after they come around. So I think that that's where it is. Definitely has an impact on trust.
Great. Thank you, Brent. Did the AI agent create the charts you showed in the retail example?
Ah, yes, that it did, and it actually surprised me with the first few iterations of them because I didn't ask for a chart, but it gave me a comparison chart early on, and then I was actually even able to say to direct it to say, can you add a column? Can you remove a brand? And then if you ask for specific frameworks and you direct it to populate a specific framework, it will help you do that as well. So that was pretty exciting to see how intuitive it was for it to go from the data itself into something closer to the format that we usually want to work with it in when we are advising and sharing out the results.
Great. Maybe someone will want to take this. Have you checked out the work on confrontation consumerism? This sounds like great data in support of that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that specifically, but I think there are a lot of related themes to the boycotts, as Sasha was talking about Target, and other ways that consumers are using their purchasing power for advocacy and and those types of things. So. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested to see how this evolves, and as we track this over time, how trust is impacted by some of these things that are on in the external environment.
Yeah, and I think it's I'm semi-familiar with it, but I'll have to do a refresh on it. Thanks for the reminder. But I think especially in our moment in time with so much going on, the complexity, the volatility, it's no longer a brand can't say, "Oh, we just had a bad PR cycle," right, and move on. It's more than that. It takes more work to come out of the bad PR cycle. It takes more work to navigate it. So those are some of the critical issues a lot of companies are facing as they figure out how to, take the hit when the hit comes and how to design a path through that to get back on solid ground.
Great. I have
Uh,
one final question. Oh, go ahead, Brent.
I was going to say, taking a page from Sasha's book, I asked our Trust GPT, uh, the how does the theory of confrontational consumerism fit with our brand trust study? And it responded, great and timely question. So I don't know if I could take credit for that, and gave about a page and a half of explanation. So I'm happy to copy and paste that and send it off at some point. But
Yeah.
I think it's a neat kind of use case for our GPT agent.
Great. I have one final question. How can I get access to brand trust scores for my industry, or could I create my own benchmark with specific competitors? So the first part of that, feel free to reach out. As I mentioned, my email address is here. Or if you already have a contact at CMB, feel free to reach out to them. We can absolutely get you brand trust scores. We could also do a learning workshop with you as well and share some of that. And yes, you could create your own benchmark, right? Specifically within healthcare, for example, we know how regionalized it is. So the healthcare brands and competitors that might be relevant to you could be quite different than those that, than those we included here, which are the more nationally known brands. So reach out and we can certainly talk more about that. So thank you all for joining us. We'll send everything out. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for joining, everybody.